Order, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Rural Affairs Select Committee. We return to our inquiry today in relation to the water industry, and we're delighted to have with us, and not, let me say, more than a little relieved, given the events of last Friday, Emma Hardy, the Water and Flooding Minister. Emma, just for the benefit of the official record and for those who are following our proceedings, can I invite you to introduce yourself and your colleague to the committee?
Yes, of course. So I'm Emma Hardy, delighted to still be the Minister for Water and Flooding, and I'm joined by David Hallam, who's one of the Deputy Directors from Defra.
Okay. Emma, we're going to be looking at the government's response to the Cunliffe Commission and indeed to our own inquiry and report into the need to reform the water sector. Can I just go right back to first base on this? What is your vision for the water industry? You know, look, everybody's going to move on from their jobs in politics at some point. So if you're able to do everything that you want to do in this job, what will the water industry look like when you've done it?
Right. I think to sum it up with one word, which probably isn't the official word I'm meant to use, is I want it to be boring again. Mm-hmm. I want it to be something which just delivers and doesn't create pollution incidences, doesn't create crises, doesn't have supply interruption, doesn't prevent us building homes where we want to be. I want it to be efficient, effective, and boring, and something that doesn't interfere in the day-to-day running of people's lives. And what we've seen over the past however many years is a water industry that, quite frankly, hasn't been working properly for people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know from some of the surgeries I've had with members around here, you know, people are facing interruption, people are facing sewage pollution, people are facing, in some instances, sewage in their back garden or in the streets of where they live. So my vision for the water industry is for it to be effective and to be boring again. You know, it shouldn't be an industry that is grabbing the headlines and that is front page of the news. It should be an industry that gets on with its job and operates in a fair and transparent way. That's my... You know, I want it to work. I want it to work. I want it to work for everybody is where I want to go.
What would you identify as the single most important factor that has meant that hitherto it doesn't work?
Regulation. I think regulation has fundamentally failed because you have a situation where, because of some of the perverse incentives that are in the water industry, for example, maintenance, there's a key one. Why do we have so many problems with supply interruption and pollution incidences? Is because we have a system where maintenance hasn't been effectively followed. I mean, I think the National Audit Office came up with their report on the rate that we have of replacing water pipes. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. So I think maintenance is a huge reason behind some of the pollution. I think also upgrading some of the assets. The whole system of regulation hasn't incentivized companies to be able to upgrade some of the assets we have. Why don't we have some of the homes that we want being built where we need them, because we don't have the assets at the standard that they should be. So I think fundamentally what has failed in the water industry has been a problem of regulation. It has been weak, it has been light touch, and that's, I think, at the core of if we want to fix this problem and get it working in a way, where we don't have to have parliamentary committees asking about it because it just works and does what it's meant to do. You've got to have an effective regulator holding them all to account, which is why that key recommendation from Sir John Cunliffe, which we've announced we're adopting, of that one single powerful regulator, I think is so essential.
I mean, look, you'll have seen the report the committee produced. We identified the culture within the industry as being one of the things that had brought us to this point, albeit that clearly there have been failures of regulation, there's a cluttered landscape of regulators, all these things. But you've got an industry here where, instead of being providers of an essential public utility in a monopoly situation, you have got big financial institutions buying up, behaving like they are high-rolling hedge fund managers, not somebody who is looking for for low reward for a low risk investment. Do you think that culture is something that you will fix with regulation?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I want to get it to as well. And so John Cunliffe said that low reward, low risk, long-term investment, that's exactly where we want to be. And can I say genuinely, the report that you did was excellent, and I particularly enjoyed some of the sessions you had.
Fun.
Yeah. They're very, very good, really impressive. And one thing I've done, which I'm happy to, if I'm able to share with the committee, is we've looked at your recommendations and the independent water recommendations to see where there's alignment. And I have to say there is really strong alignment on many of the recommendations, so that was super helpful. But I think you're right. We want to, this is why I say about making it like a stable system. You know, we should be able to, in our ambition that we have for growth and what we want to do around the country, know that we can do something in a particular area and have the water and wastewater services needed for that. Because it should be about long-term investment. People should be thinking about what they want to do, not how do they quickly want to turn something over in 5 years, but what do they want to do for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, we're talking about building reservoirs, and if you're building reservoirs, you're not thinking about turning a profit in 5 years. You're going to be thinking about investing in assets for 10, 15, 20 years to get a return on it. And that's the kind of stability we need back into the water sector, because, you know, I genuinely love this brief because water is so fundamental to absolutely everything. I mean, you speak to some of the farmers, well, I know you'll know, Charlie, about, you know, farmers and what they've had with drought and the difficulties they're having because we haven't got enough water. You go and see where they're doing fish rescues around the country because there's over-abstraction, they haven't got enough water. The chalk streams, they're building homes, the data set, you know, everything revolves around, you know, making sure we have the water we need. And at the moment, the system has failed, and that's why when we talk about revolutionary change, we mean it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, does it worry you a bit that Water UK, the industry body, thinks this is a great report, but people like Surfers Against Sewage and River Action are somewhat less enthusiastic about it?
Love Surfers Against Sewers and River Action, so I speak to them frequently, and you know, I think they've done an amazing job raising sewage pollution in their area. I know they were both keen for nationalisation, but we were straight and up from the very beginning in the terms of reference. We didn't mislead or lie to anyone. We said nationalisation was off the table. I know that was something they wanted, but they also knew that that wasn't something we were going to deliver. But where we are strongly aligned is Surfers Against Sewage raising their concerns around pollution that are going into bathing waters. I mean, some of our plan of the £11 billion that's going into upgrading the 3,000 storm overflows, we've said they need to prioritise sites that are ecologically important, so shellfish sites and things like that, but also sites that are important for humans, bathing sites, because we want to focus on improving the sites that people use and that are really important for nature. And so I think they're quite, you know, they obviously wanted us to nationalise. We're not going to do that. But I think in other ways, you know, we're hugely supportive of what they're doing. And I think they've done a fantastic job, and the same for River Action as well. And I regularly catch up with the environmental NGOs and let them know what we're doing. And they can sort of challenge me, and that's fine. And we can have that kind of conversation. But I think the way I kind of do things, Chair, and this is the way I suppose I do all politics, is regardless of where people are from and their background, is look for where you agree and then push all in the same direction. And I think fundamentally all of the environmental groups, and certainly myself, and I know this committee, are all aiming for the same thing, which is cleaner rivers, lakes and seas and a more effective water system. And that's what I think we should focus on.
Like, one of the areas where I think you will find easy agreement is around the subject of executive pay and bonuses.
Yes.
And we've had the Water Special Measures Act.
Yes.
We've also, you will have seen the areas that we explored with Thames Water around their employment retention package, I think they called it. Over the summer months, we've seen bonuses still being paid in Yorkshire Water and Southern Water. Is the Water Special Measures Act going to be enough here?
Yeah, and I think last Thursday, the previous Secretary of State, I think, left everyone in no doubt as to what he thought about the situation. And I sort of wrote it down because I thought I want to make sure I quote him correctly. And he was quite clear. He said, the payment to the CEO of Yorkshire Water by its holding company has outraged customers, and we have asked Ofwat to assess its legality as a matter of urgency. We will not tolerate any company attempting to circumvent this government's ban on unfair bonuses through exorbitant salary increases, secret bonuses, payment through parent companies, or other deception.
That's what you said, but still it happens.
So this is what we've got to address. I mean, when the Water Special Measures Act was about banning unfair bonuses, and if companies are trying to circumnavigate that and trying to fare a way around it, then we want to hold them to account.
Is that an indicator of the problem with the culture? If water companies think that they are too big to be pulled into line by government, that's pretty serious, isn't it?
I think it also illustrates the importance of having the right regulation. Now, we've asked Ofwat to investigate this and look into this, because it's not just about the letter of the law, but it's the spirit of the law. These companies had their bonuses banned because of pollution incidents and various other reasons. We didn't do it on a whim. There was a metric, there was a measure, and that was why these bonuses were banned. These companies need to accept that, recognise that it's been done in a fair and transparent way, and therefore adhere to it and not try and circumnavigate it.
We've seen quite impressive figures coming in from the water companies about what they spend on legal advice. They clearly are more interested in the letter of the law rather than the spirit. That's a cultural problem, isn't it?
And I think that's one of the things we want to change. We want to be, as I said from the beginning, what's my vision for the industry is an industry that works and behaves in the right way. And, in terms of how do you drive behavioural change or cultural change with any organisation, there's always going to be a range of things. But I think fundamentally, the water companies need to know how serious we are about this. And I think some of the recommendations that we've had from Sir John Cunliffe that we're looking at, I hope illustrate how seriously we're taking this, because as I say, the supply of water and wastewater fundamentally underpins so many of the government's wider ambitions on growth and building. We have to get this right.
Okay, finally, just on this before I pass on, Commissioners recommending a national water strategy. No actual real indication of what that should comprise. I mean, we've identified the various competing tensions. You've got lower customer bills, rewarding staff, rewarding investors, improving environmental outcomes. What are you going to do with this water strategy? When will we see the shape of it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I thought that was helpful in the report, because it reminds me of, I shouldn't name the boss I once had, but the boss once had used to send an email every Friday telling us the priority. That was the priority, as well as last week's priority, as well as the week's before's priority. And I think at some point somebody needs to say, well, what is it we actually want to achieve from the industry? And so the national strategy that we want to produce is dealing with some of these tensions. Is the focus water bills, or is the focus infrastructure for growth, or is the focus the environment? And I think the national strategy is one that needs to set out what does the government want to do, and that's something we're working through now. In honesty, I can't give you a time frame for it, but it is something we're working through right now to address some of those almost not say contradictions, but those tensions within what we're trying to achieve.
Right, I'm going to move on now. That's the kind of high-level stuff. Sorry, Jane, did you want to come in?
Yes, I was just going to ask a bit more about ownership, but are you going to come on to that next?
I wasn't going to at the moment.
Okay.
Do you want to answer your question quickly?
Yeah, just very quickly. It's John Cunliffe's review was a big chance to look in the round at the water industry, and obviously we've touched briefly on state nationalisation. That was obviously something that was ruled out initially, but other methods of ownership. So we went to Germany and spoke to their water minister, and they have many small municipal boards and companies. And we also have not-for-profit models, we have cooperative models. John Cunliffe didn't really seem to touch on those things, and some of us thought that maybe he was going to cover them. I mean, looking at his background and what he did with bank regulation more than anything else, it was pretty obvious that was what he was going to do. But do you think that's something that should or could have been explored?
I think, as you say, we were really clear on nationalisation, because I didn't want to mislead people by putting something in an inquiry that we weren't going to adopt. And the reason we weren't going to adopt it is because of the cost to government. And I don't need to explain to anyone on the committee that, we obviously, with any decision on spending money in government, if you're spending money somewhere, you're not spending money somewhere else. So nationalisation was ruled out because of the cost to government. There is a recommendation 46, from the Independent Water Commission. I mean, we're looking at, should I say, all recommendations, all 88, but 46 looks at, it says, a case-by-case basis whether it be appropriate for water company to transition to an alternative ownership model where they request to do so or following special administrative regimes. So one of the recommendations is to say, on a case-by-case basis, would it be appropriate for that water company to transition into another model? So that is there as recommendation 46. But I do want to be clear that that wouldn't involve state funding. That would not involve money from government, because we're quite clear that we're not going to be involved in sort of state money going into companies.
I suspect we're going to come back to the question of special administration later on. We've done the kind of high-level stuff now. I want to move on to reforms to the regulators. We're into the specifics here. We've got a lot to cover today, so we can maybe keep all our questions and answers tight. Andrew, you're going to kick off for us with this.
Morning. Thank you both for joining us.
Hello.
You'll be unsurprised that in a place like mine in Peterborough and the Fens, regulation is one of the big bugbears, whether it's for farmers, the drainage boards, or for constituents in terms of how the system doesn't work together. So already people have been contacting me this morning, thankful that Ofwat has confirmed the £62 million fine for Anglian Water.
Yes.
But that's also a sign of failure on one level, because it means regulation hasn't worked well upstream. We got to the point where Ofwat's needed to fine about poor failure. So one of the issues that Defra said about replacing Ofwat with a more integrated water regulator is you also look at bringing some of the EA and Natural England's responsibilities into that. One of the challenges is around people don't feel regulators work well together. So if it went wrong, combining them together could cause worse outcomes. Can you tell us more about how you think those will come together, why they will deliver better outcomes for industrial and farming use as well as residents? And you've got a sense of timeline yet?
Yeah, okay, yes. And thanks for mentioning the Ofwat enforcement that came out this morning. And that does show that this government is serious about holding the companies to account. So Ofwat have announced Anglican Water and its shareholders are paying £62.8 million because of failings. But yeah, I think when I had sort of looked at all of this and went into the department and you look at the responsibilities, you had at some points almost two different agencies doing enforcement. So you had the EA and then also Ofwat, as I've just mentioned, were fining as well. So there was this overlap in responsibilities. And I think it was difficult, therefore, to have that, I suppose, that one powerful single regulator, which is the vision of where I'm trying to get to. And I think actually having it all under one roof will be a much more effective model, because everyone will be very clear about who is responsible for what and what needs to be done. And my vision for the regulator is that it's clear, it's transparent, it is fair, but it is also able to have all of the tools needed to hold to account. So one of the other things I want to look at is, does our regulatory system at the moment have all of the tools it needs to hold companies to account? And that's something I'm in the weeds of with the department right now, is making sure that it does, because there's no point having a single regulator if it isn't able to intervene in different ways when we see problems arising. So that's where I'm sort of wanting to get to. In terms of from customers' point of view, if they have, if there's concern about you have this single powerful regulator and they don't think it's being effective, then we have the Ombudsman as well, which I was really keen, which we have announced that we've accepted as one of the recommendations, is having that the organisation with the Ombudsman powers. Now, the Consumer Council for Water does an amazing job, but they never had the same powers as an Ombudsman. And that's what we also want to see, so that customers can go to them, like you can, as I'm sure all of you do here, when your constituents come to you with an issue and you can sign off for them to go and see the Ombudsman. That's what we need to have in the water industry, which we haven't had before, to give customers a greater say. And to stop some of the issues that we've had, again, around the table, where customers have felt completely let down by the service that they've had, and they haven't been able to address it properly unless they've had a member of Parliament on an Defra committee able to hold the water company to account. So that's also what I think we need to do. So the single powerful regulator, I think, will make things much clearer. They should simplify things. They should know what their roles and responsibilities are. And I'm not trying to catch companies out. I'm trying to create a system that's fair, open and transparent and has very clear objectives on what we're trying to achieve. But likewise, you know, as with anything, you have very clear objectives, what you're trying to achieve. If you're not going to behave in the right way, there's a consequence, and if you do, then there's more of a positive consequence as well. And I also should say, to be balanced as possible, Chair, that there are, of course, some water companies that are just getting on with the job and behaving and acting in the right way. And I don't want everything to become overshadowed by, you know, some of the announcements that we've had this morning.
Talking of getting on with the job, one of the real frustrations, particularly in the farming community, has been that the EA, Natural England, water just isn't joined up and doesn't work. So this could be one of the benefits of it. But we also want to get on with the job in the east of England and the Fens with building our new reservoir. I think people are shocked and appalled that we haven't built a reservoir since 1992. Can you reassure us that the timetable for bringing this regulation together will actually help ensure we have some speed with getting on with building that, rather than it being a block? Because I know too much of our farming development has been held up by EA or Natural England, causing friction in the system rather than actually helping farmers. So will it speed it up? And secondly, do you think there's a wider responsibility in water regulation if we're going to build major infrastructure like the Fens Reservoir to deliver social value in communities like mine? So we want to ensure that the jobs and the skills that are needed to build a reservoir in our patch come to places like Peterborough and come to the Fenlands, and we ensure that people don't just get regulation, but the Department of Regulation supports investment into communities.
Yeah, I mean, yes, as a short answer. In terms of speeding up, so one of the things, in terms of when legally will the single regulator be created, it has to go through primary legislation to create a new single regulator, because the current system is set up through primary legislation. However, that doesn't stop us encouraging, which is what we're working on now, greater interaction and working together and sort of getting that ready for when the legislative change actually comes in. On the building of reservoirs, you are so right. You are absolutely right, because it is shocking that we haven't built one in such a long time. You know, our population has increased. Climate change is here as well, and we are literally not able to build what we need where we need it because we haven't got enough water. It's an appalling state of affairs. So there's also the Water Delivery Task Force, which looks at some of the big water infrastructure projects and looks at how we can hold them to account on cost, which is another issue, as well as time frame in getting these built. And your point about social value is brilliant, because one of the things I loved about Thames Tideway when I went to go and see them is when they did the Thames Tideway project, they also did loads of stuff in the local community. So they did lots of apprenticeships, they did lots of work through the local community as well, and offering sort of greater opportunities to the people who lived round there. And I think that's a great example, because I mean, even, you know, whatever the big infrastructure project is, they are doing it in place, and it will therefore have an impact on the residents much as it's needed. And so to be able to offer that extra value to the people who live in that community, I think is a hugely positive thing, and something to be encouraged.
Can I just add, and this does play into your point about what the new single regulator is tasked to do. The ministers have been clear, this isn't a merger of Ofwat and some functions from the EA and DWI. This is a new regulator. We'll decide what that regulator is going to do, and we'll bring the functions in. And one of those functions needs to be around engineering and asset building and asset health, which is something that's been missing from the situation, so should drive that much more positively in the future.
So one of the recommendations or issues Dan Corrie talked about in his report was around regulators having a more of a supervisory approach within contained discretion areas, so being proactive in looking at how they manage their responsibilities. Could you tell us the department's view on that? Do you think the new water regulator will have a more of a proactive supervisory role within areas set by the department? What you think about that, and given the transparency a new regulator has, your commitment to work with Parliament and the committee to ensure that there's some transparency as the regulator set up? Yeah,
so I think Sir John Cunliffe's supervisory approach, is that the one where he sort of envisages within the new powerful regulator you would have a team of experts who are expert in that company and know and understand the particulars of that company. And my sort of idea with this is you can't always one size fits all, because geography is different around the country, and I completely accept that there are different challenges. Some areas of our country are wetter, some areas are dry. There's lots of different challenges wherever you are, some are more rural. So I think the idea of the supervisory approach from the regulator is they know and really fundamentally understand that company, and therefore can hold it to account more effectively for what it's doing and how it's behaving. Now, the particulars are of all of this. We are very much in the weeds in the department, looking at the detail, really analysing exactly how all of these different things will work. But I can give you but in terms of broad brush, what we're looking for is within the regulator that level of expertise and knowledge. Now, we had the system that we have right now, which we're changing, was a system that was based on light touch regulation under the previous administration when it was changed, which was based on outcomes rather than outputs. I want to be, which you might think, okay, that sounds fine, but what that meant is projects weren't built and delivered. Instead, the money was returned to the customer, but projects weren't built or delivered. Whereas I want to be really focused on outputs. I want to make sure if they say they're going to upgrade that sewage treatment works, they upgrade that sewage treatment works. If they're going to upgrade the water treatment, they do it. If they're going to build the reservoir, they do it. So I want to be much more sort of proactively involved in making sure they deliver on some of these big projects. And that's my kind of vision for the supervisory approach. But as for sort of the very specifics, we're sort of working through. This is anything you want to add?
Just on constrained discretion, just to pick up on that point, which was from the Corrie review, some of the examples that we've talked about are around where regulators feel obliged to have certainty, and that can often drive expensive solutions, and giving them the discretion to find alternative ways of doing it that might deliver wider benefits, including for nature or for carbon or for communities. So that will need some regulatory reform, but it's one of those things we're looking at.
It's kind of, to be super quick, it's kind of like why we haven't as much in terms of nature-based solutions. Because if you want absolute certainty, you do concrete. Whereas if you have nature-based solutions, there's that little more element of uncertainty. So that's one of the things we're trying to look at.
Chair, can I shoehorn?
What you do, Tim? Look, a lot of this is good in substance, but I'm not hearing any timelines here. You told us in this water strategy, you honestly couldn't tell us when it would be. You were out the blocks fast on saying that Offwhat was going to be history, and I don't think many people quibbled with that. But it is now a bit of a lame duck regulator. The chief executive is moving on, and I'm not hearing any timelines or any great sense of urgency that you are going to move in this. Can you give us a bit more specifics? And when it comes to the new regulator, I presume, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, this committee will have a role in its oversight.
Yeah, sorry, I will, of course, Chair, give you time. So we're expecting to bring the white paper forward in autumn. So we're working on that right now, and that will be sort of our vision for what we're going to do going forward, and it will be a response to all of the 88 recommendations. So we're working on the white paper at this moment. We're also, in conjunction to that, sort of having meetings with all of the different regulators on how we can start to bring them together in a more informal way. So that's happening right now, and you should hear a bit more about that in October. So you've got sort of, we'll maybe be saying a little bit then we've got the white paper, then in next year, and I can see we should always be not too specific on timelines, but I want to be respectful to the Chair, that we're looking forward to bring the water bill forward next year. So that's the sort of what we're looking at in terms of timeline at the moment. So we're working on how we can sort of informally, and they are having conversations about working together because they know we want to create the single regulator. We're doing our white paper, and then next year we're looking at doing a water bill. But obviously, politics is politics and things might happen. But that's the timetable on which I'm working on. And then, so with the conversations we're having is how could we create sort of shadow organisations ahead of the primary legislation needed to actually make, because as I say, to change the regulator you need primary legislation. So that's the kind of thing we're doing right now, and there is an absolute sense of urgency with this issue, and if nothing else, I hope I convey that how important this is to me and how quickly we are trying to move through it all.
Urgency and white papers don't always go together in my experience. We'll have Tim, Charlie, and then we will need to move on to Thames.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to shoehorn tangentially a constituency matter in related to the Reservoirs Act. So in my constituency, we have Poynton Pool, which is classed as a reservoir under the Reservoirs Act. Hasn't flooded in 200 years, but an inspection means that there are works required to make it safe. Okay. But the Act does have very stringent timelines, understandably, but they're acting as a straitjacket now because the proposals from the local authority are going to remove a huge number of trees. Local residents are concerned. I wondered, firstly, whether I could pick up the issue with you privately, because it's more detailed than for this place. And secondly, if you were doing any work on the Reservoirs Act, because obviously since Toddbrook and the issues that occurred there, it's causing a huge amount of work for many owners of reservoirs, not just water companies. The Canal and River Trust is having to take a lot of remedial works, including at Toddbrook.
Yeah, of course. Very happy to sort of sit and chat to you about it, and we can get relevant officials round and sort of get into the details of it. And in terms of the Reservoir Act, yes, we have been looking a bit at the Reservoir Act, particularly around safety, but do you want to add anything, David?
Not much. I mean, we're aware of this issue, and it's not just in your constituency that this has been raised, so it's one of the items that we're discussing.
But happy to sort of pick that
okay.
up.
Thank you, Minister.
Right, Charlie, you got a quick question?
Thank you, Jay. Yes, just a quick one. Just while we're discussing, obviously, the stripping of the water-related responsibilities of Environment Agency and Natural England, there's a lot of frustration from farmers and others about their responsibilities in relation to water, whether it's Environment Agency's flooding issues, which we get in the River Hull catchment, as you know, Natural England's misinterpretation of farming rules for water. So as part of the Cabinet Office's review of arm's length bodies, can you commit to looking at their responsibilities and whether they're delivering on their responsibilities as they should as arm's length bodies of Defra?
Yeah, and just if I can express my sympathy with the wildfires that are near your constituency and I know creating a huge amount of problems. So on the farming rules for water, so what we did was we got together, we've had a round table, we've had NFU and all of the farming groups represented alongside, we've had Water UK, they're representing the water industry, Environment Agency, to look at sort of the rules and regulations around the farming rules for water, around agriculture, pollution, to make sure that they have a voice at the table. And absolutely, and I know that the farming community they've had a horrific year with the floods that they had last year and then the drought that they've had this year. And I know that there's been concerns around abstraction rules and licenses. And one of the things I'm sort of also keen to look at, which the Environment Agency have been trialling, is to enable farmers to hold more water on their own lands, to make it more simple for them to be more resilient to changing climate and the effect of droughts. We're trying to really, obviously I'm not the farming minister, but we're trying to make it as effective for farmers as possible, because we can't keep, the climate means we might be facing regular winters of flooding and summers of drought, and we have to make sure that the farming community is more resilient to that. So that's one of the things I'm really interested in doing, because I spoke to some farmers and they were telling me how they're enabled to hold their own little reservoirs on their farms because of the rules, and that's mad. So we want to try and unlock that, to enable them to be a lot more resilient.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the question of regulators in a few minutes, but I want to jump forward at the moment to look at this particular situation around Thames Water. If you enjoyed our sessions with water companies, there was twice as much to enjoy with Thames. We're joined today from the Business and Trade Committee by Charlie Maynard, and he's going to lead our questioning on this. Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. Very good to see you. One question is about mutualisation. So if Thames were to go into special administration and was coming out and there was an offer on the table for a mutualisation of the company, is that something that, and following up on your recommendation 46, which I was delighted to hear, is that something that the government would seriously consider?
So just to be sort of super clear on how it happens. So it would be so in the event of special administration, if a company went into, and this is obviously any company, went into special administration, the special administrator would look to get the best deal exiting that SAR. So they would be looking for whatever was happening with their existing creditors, or whether they would be selling it on to another company, but they'd always be looking to get whatever it is. And I know you know, Charlie, because we were on the committee together, one of the things exiting the SAR would be to repay the government if the government had spent some money on it during the time, so there's no cost to the taxpayer. So in that position, the special administrator would look at any offer that was made for that company. So if there was an offer came forward, that would be looked at alongside any other offer that would be made to that company. And we as a government are not stipulating, but obviously we would be interested in making sure that the offer was credible and not going to put the company back in another bad situation. But in terms of we are quite open to, it would be any offer that, any company that came forward. If you want to,
Thank you. Fantastic. Second one is about ultimate control and the definition of that under Ofwat's regulations. I'm just going to, we received a letter which I forwarded on to you this morning, so I don't expect you to have read it, but I only received it yesterday, which was for Business and Trade Select Committee, got a reply from Ofwat. And it basically says this: an ultimate control is a defined term under the licence. It's defined as an entity that's able to materially influence the policy or affairs of the company, in this case Thames Water. Mm-hmm. Thames Water's parent company has stated in court in July that the Class A creditors are essentially the economic owners of Thames Water. Yeah? The Class A creditors are clearly playing a very active role in the restructuring of the business. They coordinating themselves through a committee to hire investment bank, a law firm, Aiken Gump, barristers from South Square Chambers, and a senior advisor. So they're clearly acting as a group and having huge influence. However, Ofwat refuses to acknowledge that the Class A creditors, despite all those facts, meet the test of being able to materially influence the policy or affairs of the company. What do you think?
So the ultimate controller recommendation, which Sir John Cunliffe made, is obviously not in existence at the moment with Ofwat. That would be, if we accepted it as a recommendation, would be one of the powers we would potentially give to a new regulator. So this is again another reason why as regulation failed. That currently the ultimate controller power currently Ofwat doesn't have it. It doesn't, it's not in existence. Sir John's recommended it, that we look at it for the new regulator, but it's not currently there.
Sorry, but the ultimate, the ultimate controller fact is defined, and Ofwat, it's in Ofwat's power to decide who is an ultimate controller or not. Ofwat is currently saying that they don't believe, despite in court Thames Water's parents saying they are essentially the economic owners of the company, that they are not able to materially influence Thames Water, which seems completely extraordinary.
Yes, it is. And that is the current situation that we have, and that's why we want to change it. Because the powers, the ultimate controller powers that Sir John recommended, Ofwat don't currently have those
Ignoring
powers.
Sir John's recommendations, it's dealing with the here and now.
Yeah.
So the here and now says, if you materially influence the company, you are an ultimate controller. Clearly the Class A creditors, as de facto economic owners of the company, are able to materially influence. So why is Ofwat not accepting this and saying that they should also be included as an ultimate controller?
I don't know if we're talking at cross purposes. I'm trying not to. But back to sort of point one, regulation has failed. Ofwat haven't had the powers, in my opinion, that they've needed to. They don't currently have the powers, the ultimate controller powers. That's one of the ones.
Charlie's point is that they do have this power, yes, but they're refusing to exercise it.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Because the nominated, the nominal ultimate controller for Thames Water is a company that's defunct, doesn't function anymore.
The nominal ultimate controllers right now are the shareholders who have taken their board directors off, which is fine. They can stay there because they still officially own those shares, even if those shares are worth nothing. So that I've got no issue with that. What is extraordinary, though, is in court, Thames's parent company is saying we are essentially owned by the creditors, and yet Ofwat is saying they don't even materially influence the company, even though in court the parent of Thames is saying we are, essentially they are the economic owners of the business. And I think Ofwat is failing in its duties to enforce that. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
So I think there's much I agree with everything that you've said there, in that the situation is far from, you and I have talked, the situation is far from ideal, and I think I want to be in a situation where the new regulator is able to intervene and prevent a situation like this happening. But I'm going to let David come back on the specifics.
Well, it's only to support what you've just said. It is an unusual situation. The only point I was going to add is, and at the same time, there is still an existing board and shareholders of this company that are the ones who are controlling the company's operation. So I can understand why Ofwat have taken that view, although I understand your point about how odd this seems.
Could I let it rest, and maybe if you could kind of dig into that and kind of reply in writing, if it would be possible, because it's really important that, I'm not saying instead, and this is a really important thing, it's in addition. The Class A creditors are clearly have material influence on Thames Water, and so if it's in addition to the existing shareholders, why is Ofwat not recognising that? That's the question.
Very happy to take that away. And on the sort of wider point and principle, that, how do we prevent this situation happening in the future? I mean, a lot of what the Independent Water Commission was looking at is how do we prevent a situation like this happening in the future? But yes, we're happy to.
Okay, are you done on that, Charlie? Okay, Henry, do you want to pick up some points on this?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Just sort of taking a step back a second, under what conditions would the government put a water company into special administration?
Yeah, great question. So the government doesn't put companies into special administration. The court puts companies into special administration. So the government would apply to the court saying that we haven't, this is how it works. So we would apply, make a case to the court and write to them and say, we believe this company should go in special administration. This is our argument for, and then a judge would look at that and say either we agree with you or we don't agree with you, and then special administration. The alternative way of going into special administration would be the company itself says, we're unable to continue and we're going into special administration. So there's some sort of mistaken belief that it's a government's decision, or the Secretary of State to write.
It's the government's decision to take it to a court, is it not?
It's a government's decision to supply the evidence to the court, but the court could, if we, were to do it with a really poor evidence base or not have the evidence there, a court would say, well, clearly no, you don't have the evidence to put this, we don't agree with you. So the ultimate decision will be made. So the government would present its case to the court would decide whether it goes into special administration. That's how it works.
Do you have a good case for Thames Water?
It hasn't met the threshold for going into special administration. It is not currently.
So under what circumstances does a water company have to get to in order to meet special administration from a government's perspective?
Okay, so in terms of reaching special administration, it has to be either a serious breach of its principal statutory duties or an enforcement order that's inappropriate for it to contain its licence. So serious breach, this is the current rules as are, and obviously we're reforming things, but this is the situation as it is at the moment. So a serious breach of its principal statutory duties would mean fundamentally water doesn't come out the tap and your toilets don't flush and sewage goes away. That's a serious breach of your fundamental duties.
That's a threshold for a serious breach.
Yeah, there's a whole range of, I've got a whole list here of, so other performance metrics that Ofwat track in terms of looking at what we'd consider a performance SAR, asset health, leakage reduction, water supply interruptions, customer satisfaction, pollution, internal sewage, spending versus allowances. As a whole range, and all of this is part of the Water Company Performance Report, which they're published every October 2024, and it looks at the performance of all of the companies and then determines whether those companies, how those companies are performing. And the situation as it is at the moment under the current rules and legislation as we have is that Thames Water has not met the threshold for going into special administration.
That's the formal advice you've been given as a minister?
Yes.
Sorry, Henry.
So just sort of taking this a bit further, because I think in August you've appointed, I think it's FTI Consulting as the third administrator in case of special administration.
Yes.
So what's the progress you've made on your contingency planning?
Yeah, and that's totally right, because we want to be ready for anything. It'd be irresponsible if I wasn't ready for any eventuality, and therefore I think it's absolutely right that we need to be prepared for anything. At the moment, as I say, the company remains stable. We are monitoring it very closely. We're looking at everything. It has not met the threshold for going into special administration, but I don't want to be one of those ministers that's caught on the hop and that hasn't been prepared properly. So we've made sure that we've got everything ready, so in the event of any eventuality, that we are prepared and ready, so that for the customers out there, for the people working for the company as well, that the people working there would still get paid in the event of a SAR, that customers would still get fresh water. I think it's right and proper that we're prepared for everything, and that's what we are, though I do want to stress the company has not met that threshold.
Are you confident that the creditors are in the best position stewards, should I say, for Thames's turnaround?
Ofwat are continuing to talk to the creditors. Now, as government, because that's an independent process, I don't have conversations with the creditors. That's not how it works. But I think your wider point, which I said...
related, isn't it? That's what I'm getting at, in terms of where's the threshold for when you're going to intervene, what's your contingency planning, and then how are you assessing the people who are actually doing that at the moment, and what their levels in terms of their preparedness to actually turn this around as a company?
So we're involved. I mean, this is, it's no underestimation to say this is quite a large part of my time is spent on this current situation and making it work more effectively. This is why, why I think we need fundamental change within the regulation and the regulatory system, is because we are in a situation now where there aren't as many tools available as would be helpful. But as we are right now, until we change the law, until we change the rules and change the system, we're in a system where Ofwat is talking to the company, we're monitoring the performance of the company very closely. Those conversations are ongoing, and the company is still solvent at the moment. It is still able to continue, so it hasn't met the threshold, because you meet the threshold either for insolvency or performance. It hasn't met the threshold for insolvency, it hasn't met the threshold for performance. Anything you want to add to?
Only a couple of things. Firstly, and the creditors are a very diverse group, and there are some that specialise in difficult situations like this. There are many that are investors across the UK infrastructure sectors, places like Hinkley Point and other major infrastructure. The second thing I would add is whoever owns the company, they will have to meet the same criteria as any owners. They will still be held to account in the same way. And that's exactly what Ofwat are in the process of doing, and looking at their turnaround plan and seeing, does this get the company into a stable situation financially as well as in terms of performance.
And what's the assessment in terms of the immediate and long-term cost to the taxpayer in all of this? In terms of the special administration. So I'm jumping around a little bit, and I apologise for that.
Right.
In terms of your preparedness for the eventuality of potential government action, what's your assessment of the cost to the taxpayer in that situation?
The cost of Defra preparing, or the cost of the special administration?
Yes.
So the cost of a special administration, I mean, if any company were to enter special administration, of course there's going to be a cost to the government, but there's also, the government would be also collecting the customer bills at the same time, so the level of cost would be difficult to calculate, because it would depend on the company, etc., etc. And through the Water Special Measures Act, what we've looked at is cost recovery to government. And obviously exiting the SAR, when the company was sold, the government would be classed as one of the creditors and would be repaid for any expenditure they've made during the period of a SAR.
So at the end of SAR, it would be cost neutral to the taxpayer?
Yes.
It depends on it depends on how much it costs, and it depends on how much is recouped, and then the government has a choice of whether to seek to recoup those costs from bill payers.
Okay, so sorry, yes. So in the event of a SAR, if you was to sell that company for less than, say, the government had spent on it, the government, through the Water Special Measures Act, has the power to recoup that money from either customers that are in that local area, customers that are in the whole country, however, following consultation. So you could be in a situation, yes, where it doesn't cost the taxpayer any money, but there might be a cost to bill payers in that area.
Thank you. And I'm going back to the national security issue. Okay, so thinking about the concerns that we have about national security in the context of the investors and the creditors' position that we've touched on. I mean, the water sector is not listed as a sensitive industry under the National Security and Investment Act. Do you think it should be?
It's something that we're live discussing now, and when we've reached a firm conclusion, I'm happy to sort of write and explain my reasoning either way.
I'm grateful.
Okay, Helena, we'll come back to your questions in relation to regulation.
Thank you, Chair. And I should start by declaring an interest as the co-chair of the all-party group on water pollution. I think we've heard a lot of evidence today, and indeed our committee has over the last couple of months, about how useless Ofwat is as a regulator. It's a regulator that doesn't even want to bark, let alone bite. And then we have the Environment Agency, which many people have spoken about how it's been missing in action during major incidents and just not responding when people need them to. So we know that the government has announced it will be creating a new regulator. How will you ensure that that regulator has the teeth that it needs to have? And how will you ensure that it puts the fear of God into the water bosses?
Thanks very much. And can I say, as I know I've said this to you privately, and I'll say this on record, what a formidable campaigner you've been on this issue since you came in and before you came in to Parliament for your constituents. So I think there's various recommendations in Sir John Cunliffe's report which talk about giving the regulator a lot more powers. I know Charlie was talking about the ultimate controller power, for example. That's one of the ones that we're discussing and having a look at right now, and there's ones around materially changing the company as well that are in there. There's the supervisory model where within the regulator they'd really fundamentally know that company, be able to hold it to account. David mentioned as well that we haven't got, in my opinion at the moment, the sufficient capability enough to really look at engineering. So when the water companies say this costs this much, where is the interrogation of those costs? So there's quite a lot of things in the water in the Commission's report which we're looking at right now, which to address exactly the point that you're making, which is how do we make sure that the new regulator is a powerful regulator that can properly regulate this industry and get it out of the situation it's in and prevent it ever returning to it in the future.
And as you know, we've been having all the water bosses in and grilling them about very specific failings that they've made and wider problems in the sector, which is completely rotten. I just want to ask about some of our specific findings and recommendations that we put to the House in that report and hear the government's position on those. Yep. So as you know, we've suffered a number of major water outages in my constituency in Hastings and Rye, having a huge impact on people. There's been other major incidents around the country, and as you said, water is key. When people lose water, it becomes an emergency. So we made quite a specific recommendation about the need for there to be proper guidance on the water companies about what their responsibilities and duties were when these incidents occur. We know there is clear guidance already about compensation, and the government has acted to raise that compensation, which is certainly welcome. But what is lacking is a set of guidance on what they have to provide when, as that incident goes on. So our exploration of this issue has found that too often water is not delivered to people. Too often water companies fail to open enough water stations and they cause traffic gridlock across an area, which means people can't access bottled water even more. And then when that incident goes into day 2, day 3, basic sanitation and hygiene requirements start kicking in, and there is no requirement on a company to provide portaloos or showering facilities or help with cooking, for example. So what's the government's position on our recommendation about that?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And there have been, I would like to be, though I'm not naive enough to think we can do it tomorrow, but I want to be in a situation where this doesn't happen, because actually we have a resilient water sector and we don't have the instances that you've had and had to campaign on. So I was just checking through where we are, and there's a lot of alignment on that. So the Independent Water Commission proposes strengthening, obviously, the CCEW and the Ombudsman routes and having clearer standards. So there is a lot of alignment from your report and recommendations on making sure. The other thing that and I know you're concerned about it too, is vulnerable customers and making sure that companies know where the vulnerable customers are and know where they need. So looking at the priority services register as well, making sure that companies actually know in the event, as you outlined, in a water outage, that do they know where the vulnerable people are that need bottled water delivering? Are they able to get it to them on time? And what we found, and I go back to my point about water companies being variable, because there's some that are really good at this and then there's some that are not, is making sure that they can get it to the people who really need it. So that's and that's something we can do now. We don't need primary legislation for that. That's something we can get on with. And quite a lot of this stuff around consumers and customers and how they're treated, we don't need primary legislation for. We can actually just get on with it. So as I say, I've been looking at priority services register. Does a company know where its vulnerable customers are? What is its plan to get the water to the vulnerable customers in an effective and timely manner for exactly the reasons that you've outlined? It has a huge impact on people's health if they're not able to wash and they're not able to access fresh water. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and we've been working really hard with the department. As I say, some of the stuff we don't need primary legislation. We can just look at getting on with it. And I've gone around the only one I've not been to yet is Wessex, and that's just because of timetabling. I've gone around every other water board and company and to talk to their board. And one of the things I've been talking to them about is customers, bills, but also, what is the customer experience and how are customers being treated by this company. And as I say, there's I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There's some that do things really well, and there
is a commitment from the department to set out some proper guidelines about what we can expect on day 1, day 2, day 3 of a water outage incident, and learn the lessons from past failures.
Yes.
Thank you. And then flooding has been another massive issue.
Oh gosh, yes.
So many of us, I've had constituents that have waded through sewage in their own home, been forced to move out for 6 months, others having it pour into their back garden. There's currently no duty on the water company to come out within a certain time and to fix it and put it back to how it was originally. Can we get clear guidance on that for consumers and give them those protections?
Again, yeah, that's something else I'm keen. There was another colleague sort of raised to me about sewage pouring into their back garden, which was just horrific that somebody would have to put up with that. Yeah, so that's another. So we're looking at sort of lots of things around consumers, and I can't sort of give you a guarantee we're going to do this or that, but it's certainly one of the things we want to look at. It's generally, and again, it's one of the frustrations I have is it shouldn't require government to say to a water company, treat your customers well, give them a good service, and actually behave when they have, it's kind of, and as again, some don't, but some do. But it's certainly something that I want to be able to say to all of them, that in the event of this horrific situation, you should be treating customers well, and it shouldn't require primary legislation to make them do it. It should just require a greater emphasis on the treatment of their customers.
But our experience shows that we do need those guidelines, we do need those guardrails, because this is an industry that thrives on wriggling out of legal loopholes where they can. So our plea to you as a committee would be to please put those legal protections in place for our constituents. We've also called for a single social tariff. Can you update us on the progress there, Minister?
Yeah, of course. So that was in a recommendation from Sir John Cunliffe as well, and there are actually the powers for the single social tariff within the Water Special Measures Act. But one of the things two things. So one of the things, as I say, I've been going around all of the water boards talking to them about their offer for customers, and some are doing some really good things. You have some companies where genuinely their money is being given from shareholders directly to boost up what the customers on lower incomes are getting in that area. Some of them are also looking at working with different organisations and agencies looking at automatic enrolment so that people don't have to apply for it. They're able to write to the customers and say, would you like to be on this tariff, through work that they're doing with things like the Job Centre and various other organisations. And then, as I say, it's variable. But there is some really good practice. And what I want to make sure, and this is, we're looking at this recommendation, is we don't get in a situation where you introduce a national social tariff and actually some people in one area who had a really good service find that it's not as good as it was the one they had previously. So I want to be looking at how do we look at levelling up. But as I say, with a national social tariff, without getting into the weeds of this, it means that you wouldn't be having, therefore, as you have with some water companies, that additional money coming in from shareholders in that area. So I don't want there to be unintended consequences of trying to do a good thing.
Noted. And lastly, on a cultural point in the sector, we have heard repeatedly the water bosses come and justify eye-watering bonuses here, despite overseeing huge failure. And when we've pressed them on what their percentage bonus is, it's always much, much bigger than the bonus package available for the frontline staff who are actually out fixing the pipes and repairing the broken infrastructure. So if it's really an industry that is focused on delivery and fixing the system, why are the incentives so much bigger proportionally for those at the top? And does that need to change in the sector?
Yeah, and I want to just say, you know, I think our frontline staff are doing an incredible job, and they've faced a horrific amount of abuse from some of them. And I've been speaking to the unions about this. And one of the things that the unions were saying is that there's a situation where some of the people working for certain water companies are trying to cover up the company they work for because of the abuse that they're getting in the street. And that's absolutely outrageous. They are not the people responsible for the actions of the owners of a company or the man, you know, they are the people going out there and cleaning it up. I think your point is maybe a wider point on, you know, we have a situation in many industries where people at the bottom aren't getting paid enough, and that is why I'm so hugely supportive, Chair, if you don't mind me pivoting away from Defra for a moment, of the Workers' Rights Bill that's currently going through Parliament right now, and why I think that's such a key piece of legislation. I'm very proud to be part of a government that's introducing it.
I'm sure we're all alive to the wider significance of that.
Yes, but it's because fundamentally, you know, there is a question here about how people on the front line are being treated. As I say, I chat to the unions about this, and nobody should be going to work worrying about covering up where they work for because they think they're going to be facing abuse.
But your message to the industry about the differential between those bonuses for the bosses at the top who have been failing and those frontline workers, what would your message be?
Well, we created a system through Ofwat which is clear and transparent when it comes to awarding, as you know, from the Water Special Measures Act, which is clear and transparent. I believe in being clear and transparent with you, but you know, with the wider industry. This is the criteria for achieving a bonus or not. And that is the criteria that they should not try to circumnavigate and should not try and find a way around. We've made it clear, we've made it honest, we've made it transparent. I think that's the role of government. Obviously, I'm not going to get into saying whether or not someone in a private company, whatever that private company might be, should get paid this, that or whatever. What we're saying is we're setting out the rules for bonuses to make it clear and transparent. But I would also say, as a Labour Member of Parliament, I'm very pleased that we're also looking at changing the rules around workers' rights.
Just to be right on this, though, I mean, Ofwat said that it was only the CFO and the CEO that were blocked in terms of bonuses. Bit of a token effort, isn't it?
No, respectfully, I don't agree.
You're happy with that?
I think that's the right, because they are the people who are ultimately in charge. And I think that's the right thing to do, because I wouldn't want to be in a situation where somebody would be held responsible for the actions of their superior. So I actually think it's right to make it the person in charge of the company.
Okay. We'll move on. And look at tackling pollution. Tim, you're going to lead us in this.
Thank you, Chair. You'll have seen, Minister, you mentioned that you'd looked at some of our previous sessions, that we've heard some of the horrendous issues of pollution that the water industry have been involved with, and many of our constituents are really concerned about the ongoing issues of pollution in our waterways and in our rivers. Now, the Commission called for reform to streamline all the different regulations, the 94 regulations, the 2017 regulations, to change and have a single target for surface body water, which at the moment, as you know, is in a really bad place. The target is, I think, 75-77% to be in good ecological condition. It's currently 21%. Are you minded to accept those proposals to streamline regulations? I think one of your earlier answers suggested that you might be. And will you adopt that target?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, what I did was we went through your report and then Sir John Cunliffe's report and literally created a table to look at where we align. And I mean, it's hugely aligned on all of them. On the specific, will we adopt this specific target, will we adopt that one? I can't give you an answer to that at the moment, because truthfully, we are working through the weeds of this right now to see exactly where we need to get to. But the sort of bigger point about the levels of pollution that we see, and I know we're talking about the water companies here, but we also have a problem with agriculture pollution as well. So we have a problem with pollution that comes from the water industry and pollution that comes from agriculture, and we need a plan to tackle both of it. So we are looking to upgrade, and as I mentioned earlier, we're looking to upgrade the sewage, I'm losing it now, it's our blame anyway. But yes, so we're looking to upgrade the storm overflows. I apologise. The 3,000. Thank you. The 3,000 storm overflows, and we have said that they need to be focusing on looking at where areas that impact human health and areas that impact the environment as well. So we're looking at bathing waters, and we're looking at places like, you know.
I suppose just the public will want reassurance that in the process of streamlining and making those regulations coherent in the way the Commission recommends, that we don't have any slippage in targets and they don't become less ambitious. And also, I suppose that the OEP is involved as well in helping frame some of those.
Yeah, I can commit to you that there will be no slippage in ambition. And on the group that I mentioned that were looking at the farming rules for water and agriculture pollution, I should have also mentioned the OEP were represented in that meeting as well.
And then moving on, the Commission's reports also called for reform of self-monitoring by water companies, which we found particularly worrying here. Now, our report specifically called for clearer standards, clearer monitoring, better link with citizen scientists, some amazing scientists amongst the public in Windermere, Bournemouth and other places who've provided us with incredible data that's helped us hold the water companies to account. Now, will you consider these measures as part of future reforms? Was the Commission didn't comment on these, and actually we also talked very importantly about making sure that regulators had automatic access to company data, which we thought was important.
Yeah, and citizen scientists have done an amazing job, absolutely incredible. I'd like to pay credit to all of them that we have in all of our constituencies up and down the country. And you're right, we wanted open source monitoring so that everyone can again, it's about my general drive to be how do we create an industry that is more transparent in every way possible. And one of them is open source monitoring to make sure that that information is available for an environmental group, but also, you know, for a family you might want to go down and wander by, you know, river, lake or sea and see what's happening. So we're trying to drive towards that openness and transparency. We've got 100% now being monitored, and we want to make that information available to everybody. So that's the sort of drive. So it won't just be available for a group or a regulator. We want that information to be available for anybody who has an interest in it. And I think that's the best, honest and most transparent thing to do.
So when you've done that comparative analysis between our report and the Cunliffe report, and where Cunliffe was silent on this and we weren't, you're minded to look at what we've proposed in a positive light?
Yeah, I should stress, so for the white paper, for example, we are not, yes, it will respond to the John Cunliffe report, absolutely, but it's going to be wider than that. So we're going to be taking in sort of other things as well that we want to think about in terms of the water industry. So I'll give you an example. So again, agriculture pollution wasn't in the remit really on the terms of reference of Sir John's report, but that's something that we want to be looking at in the white paper. So there are sort of other things that we want to be looking at as well. And as Helena mentioned, one of the things I want to be looking at is customers and the experience for customers as well. And of course, you know, I mean, a lot of this whole, the reason we're all here is because of the outrage the public have felt around pollution and how angry and furious that they've been. So that is a huge part, is what do we do about, you know, how do we drive down levels of pollution? And we do have our ambitious target to reduce it by half, but, you know, there's always, you know, we're always looking for other things we can do.
Could I just add, sorry, if I may though, the government committed on the day the report was published back in July that we would move to open monitoring, which I think is supporting the direction of travel that you're already setting out.
Thank you. That will reassure people. And on that final point, I don't mean to be negative, but it's a great target, the ambition to halve pollution by 2030. And of course, we've seen plans involving nearly £10 billion worth of investment, which will help us get there. I suppose there's a degree of cynicism from us here because the target's a great target, but getting there depends on the very water companies who've had such a poor track record of achieving anything in this area. So how do you feel we're going to get to that target with the tools that you've got?
That's a great question. So there's two things. There's the Water Delivery Task Force, but we're looking at sort of the bigger projects and upgrades and making sure we're holding companies to account on delivering them on time and on budget. But I think it's also, you know, as I say, I've been to see the water boards. It's going to see those water companies. It's making them really clear about the priorities that we have as a government. I mean, the previous Secretary of State only wrote to the water companies, I think last week, you know, setting out that dealing with pollution has to be at the forefront of all of their minds in everything they do, because there's such, quite rightly, such outrage, you know, the general public about what's happened, and they are prioritising the ones that as I say, impact bathing waters and impact ecological sites, including chalk streams. You know, that has to be a priority, but also chalk streams is abstraction, but you know, we are also looking at sewage pollution. But as I say, I think if we really want to clean up the water, we do need to address both sewage and agriculture.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Tim. Jane, you're going to pick up some questions on
that
other
kind
sources
of,
of
that kind of leads into what I'm going to talk about, which are other types of pollution. So agriculture, pesticides. Of course, 45% of water bodies are affected by agricultural pollution, so it is a big issue. And the ELMS targets were 65 to 80% of landowners and farmers adopting nature-friendly farming on 10 to 15% of their land by 2030. Now, the OAP wanted that to be more ambitious. And Sir John has made recommendations about tightening the rules for sludge and fertiliser. But the rules are quite complex, and from talking to farmers in my area, I know that they struggle to comply. It's expensive to store, to comply with the rules and to store their slurry. And of course, we're looking at a new round of SFIs. So I'm wondering how you intend to achieve the goals on tightening those rules and how you will help farmers to do that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And I know I'm obviously not the farming minister, but I know from the farmers that I've spoken to in relation to water, everyone wants to do the right thing. So we have increased visits. The Environment Agency have increased visits to farms, and we've led with advice-led support. Well, they'll go in there and sort of give them advice and try and work with farmers to make sure that they're doing things in the most effective way. As you mentioned, there is the Environmental Land Management Scheme. There's also catchment-sensitive farming, and we've just announced an update to the farming rules for water in July, but that group is continuing to work together. And as I say, that group comprises of farmers, the water industry, the OEP, the Environment Agency. There's many of them working together to try and deal with this holistically. And I think that's the best way to do it. So I'm also obviously updating the Environmental Improvement Plan as well. So they're going with advice-led. We're working with the industry. And I have to say, actually, from the NFU, there's been a real willingness to look at this. And I found that, they were really willing, really sort of keen to sort of look how they can address this. So there feels like there's a lot of goodwill in trying to do something about this. And on pesticides, there's the national, the NAP on pesticides as well, which is something we've been looking at. And I know you were very pleased about the emergency authorisation last year. Is there anything you want to add on farming?
No, other to emphasise the point about the programme of work to do, I think, exactly what you're asking for, which is to simplify the regulation so that people can apply
and
it.
I think herds have got bigger, so the amount of slurry has got bigger, and farmers have been struggling to cope, and they don't have the money or the infrastructure, because obviously it hasn't been built up over time. So I did want to make that point. Coming back to the pesticides, particularly in flea treatments, I have some constituents who are very concerned about this, so I have done some looking at it. And of course, we do now have a roadmap, but that roadmap doesn't have very clear timelines. And I wanted to ask just a few things about that. So the roadmap talks about some of the warnings on packaging, usage, guidance, and point of sale advice on some of those pet treatments. In some countries, I think Switzerland, they're looking at making them prescription only. Is that something we would be considering? And when the roadmap comes into being, will there be that full consultation with those environmental groups as well, who do have great concern about this and feel that maybe they haven't been involved in the process?
Just remembering before I came here, signed off a written question with somebody asking, it was probably someone asking exactly.
That's probably me.
Yeah, exactly about this. There does seem to be growing concern about this. I think I'm starting to see a few more letters in my postbag and some more questions coming from around this. We are looking at doing some research into it. I think I wouldn't want to jump to saying we're going to do this or whatever, because obviously having I've got 3 cats myself, and being able to treat them for fleas because they wander in and out is quite valuable. So there are various things I think we need to consider here, and I think it's right that we consider it in a careful way. But to let you know, we are looking at it.
And I suppose the other point was, we've mentioned agricultural pollution, pesticide pollution, but of course there is runoff as well.
Yeah.
From roads and all sorts. And again, that's working cross departments, so that's a bit more difficult. But what plans do you have to deal with that kind of thing as well?
You're right. And again, it's another source of pollution that Sir John wasn't, we didn't have in his terms of reference to look at, but it's something that we're thinking, that we're looking about what's the best way, because well, you'll know yourselves, it gets quite complicated when you're looking at trying to reduce pollution when it comes from many different sources, and much of the time and attention, understandably, has been on sewage, but there are all of these other sources as well, and if we're serious about cleaning up, we do need to look at all of them. My focus right now is on getting the regulation right around the water industry and looking at agriculture pollution and what's the right way in which we can handle that, but you're quite right to point out there are other sources too.
Am I right in thinking that you would control the planned pilot study in the River Wyre for soil research?
We're doing a joint study on the River Wyre with Wales, which was like £1 million research study to look at, but that's more looking at sort of agriculture pollution and what's happening with the River Wyre to come up with the best answer and solution for what we can
that's £1 million.
Yes.
Promised. When are they going to see that actually start to be released?
So they started it, oh gosh, when did I go and visit? They started it last year. It was going to be a year's looking at it for a year's programme. And so it's farmers, environmental groups, non-government organisations, citizen sciences, the gathering data, testing solutions. So I'll check in with you and let you know exactly when they expect to complete.
There's no when that money will come on stream.
Oh no, they've got, sorry, so they've got, they're doing the research work right now. I'll let you know when they're expected to complete it.
Okay. Right, we're going to move on to drought responses and water resilience. Sarah, you're going to lead here, please.
Thank you, Chair. So as we know, across the UK, and we've mentioned it numerous times, lots of different areas are in prolonged sort of drought. And we are experiencing in Northamptonshire prolonged dry weather. With that comes that the Northampton arm of the Grand Union Canal has had to be closed. Stoke Bruin Lock in my constituency is also closed. And obviously all of this means it has a huge impact on the economy, on the environment and on food security. Now, given that facts and action are actually going to be key, sort of what measures has Defra identified that could have been taken to make our water supply more resilient or to mitigate the effects of these prolonged dry periods?
Yeah, you're right. It's been an incredible time. Driest spring on record in England since 1893. I mean, that is how dry it has been, and hottest June on record. And I think, as well as talking about this year, I'm basing the presumption that this is going to be a regular thing that happens each summer. I think with the way the climate's changing, it is going to be more regular. So at the moment, I mean, so in terms of the immediate action, I attend the National Drought Group, which meets every month, which is everyone you can think of coming together to talk about what the plans are for dealing with drought. But that's sort of more in the immediate short term, sort of what are the solutions here and now. But to answer your question about how do we create a more resilient system? How do we have a more resilient water system? It's my vision for the industry is that it works and works effectively. I think one of them is looking at where we store water. So looking at how do we support farmers in terms of being able to store water on their own land for drought. We have a situation where we spend winter trying to remove the water because we've got too much flooding, and then we spend summer wishing we had more water. There needs to be, on a very basic level, a way of storing more of the water we want. Why reservoirs are so important, but also, sustainable urban drainage. There's a whole range of things that we need to. So I suppose the way I'm addressing it isn't just about how do you deal with drought, is how do you make our water system more resilient to our changing climate. I think that's where we need to be thinking and focusing about this. And one of those is the big projects, is reservoirs, but there's also other things that we could do on a more local level, as I say, including, how do we support farmers in holding more water on their farms.
Yes, and I think also history is key in all of these things. I think if we look back to 2022 and 23, that drought, actually several water companies apparently were too slow to prepare applications for their drought permits and their orders. and I think they seem to favour relying on emergency measures rather than actually that investing, as you were talking about. So do you have any sort of steer on how you compare this response now to what happened back in 2022-3? I appreciate you weren't necessarily in your role at that point. And do you think there's any signs of improved resilience already at this stage? Perhaps
because I wasn't obviously here in 2022, I might ask David, who was the official in 2022, to answer that one for me.
So my sense is that every drought is different, but my sense is that this one has been better prepared for. And I think that's partly learning some of the lessons from 22 on all parties, and making sure, for example, that companies were ready with their drought permit applications so that they could apply them when they needed them and not being behind the curve, and that they were doing all they could to plan and communicate with their customers ahead of needing to put in temporary use bans and so on. So my sense has gone a little bit better, but still the situation is very difficult, and especially a bit further north and west of you, where the water resources are in a difficult situation.
And I assume you are doing a report or an analysis into this at this point. Is that going to be, because I think that sometimes the absence of data and figures is the one thing that we're struggling with a lot in these areas.
The National Drought Group, which the Minister sits on, is the centrepiece for all of that and has really great analysis going into it to support all those different groups in taking the right decisions.
And one of the things we're really keen, which I'm really keen to communicate, is, you know, when temporary use bans come in, so, you know, hose pipe bans, but officially temporary use bans come in, is sort of explaining more to the people who are having to abide by them why. And I'm not sure that's always well enough communicated in terms of, you know, the impact, you know, basically the drought and the impact it's had on farmers, the impact it's had on livestock as well, the impact that it's had on nature, the impact that it's had on chalk streams, the impact that it's had on fish, on, you know, it's had a huge impact. And I think when we're asking people to make a sacrifice by not using their hose pipes or not, you know, changing their behaviour in terms of water use, what I'd like to do is to communicate more effectively with the general public that this isn't about, you know, doing the water company a favour. This is actually about helping to protect our environment, helping to support farmers, and helping to make sure that we've got all of the water that we need for our critical infrastructure. And I kind of, that was one of my, probably sharing too much, but that was one of my sort of thoughts on it, is it has to be, tackling drought has to be a team effort. And I think everyone understanding that if we're going to see this more frequently, we need to start thinking about how we all use water more than I think we ever have before.
Do you think, though, because obviously the government has large ambitions about house building, and obviously it's going to push that, but that's going to be incredibly water intensive, and whilst the water companies are saying, oh yes, we will be resilient in the future, do you actually have confidence, or what other measures do you think you need to be putting in place to make sure that we can hit that? Because as you said, livestock, fish, the environment is a huge priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there are some things that we can do which we're looking at changing. So one of the things we're looking at changing is around water efficiency of, you know, your white goods and things like that. How are we using water more efficiently than we have in the past? So water efficiency labelling as well, so that if customers are going to buy a new washing machine, they might be looking at, oh, this one's more water efficient, I'd like to, you know, look at choosing that, so we can have that more informed debate, so that we can all think about our water, you know, our water uses and how, you know, how we're going to use it. Because as I say, this isn't just about, you know, us as people, but this is the wider impact that not having enough water. But we need that long-term things as well. We need to get those reservoirs built. We also need to tackle leaks. That's another big priority as well. We lose an awful lot of water to leaks, so tackling leaks has to be something as well as the big infrastructure and building reservoirs. And if it's not too early to start talking about leaky loos, but we also need to deal with leaky loos, because I was amazed by how much water is lost with the number of leaky loos. I've now become one of those people when you go into a public toilet and the loo's leaking, I'm like, that's terrible. You know, before this brief, I used to love dry summers and now I hate them. But I also hate leaky loos. So I think, but again, it's having that sort of more, you know, wider conversation about this is something we need to be in as a team, and we need to all be thinking about our use of water, because our climate is changing.
Yes.
Jenny.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just want to follow up on some of Sarah's points. Before I do, last week I was at the East Suffolk Water Abstractors Group, SWAG. Okay. So it's very timely to have this conversation, and I know they'll be delighted with your recognition that you just made about valuing food security and not just talking about the kind of water as the public good point, but having a broader view on it. And to that point, I just want to dig a little bit deeper on the assessment of the value of water and how water is valued, and if the department has looked at how it's valued. SWAG came out with a report this week looking at the value of water in Suffolk and Norfolk and the consequences of water. We're a dry region, as you know, and with all the cuts to licences and abstractions, the impact that could have on our regional economy could be from anything from 1.2 billion up to 2.3 billion over a 20-year period on the supply chain, on agriculture, and on the wider rural economy. So I'm just wondering if you as a department have looked at the value of water and how that interplays across a whole range of different sectors.
You're so right. You're absolutely right. And as I say, it underpins everything. So I'm genuinely so pleased to still be here. Because it's so fundamentally important to absolutely everything. And we only realise it's fundamentally important when we have the driest spring since 1893. How important water is. So I think water resilience is one of my top priorities, and we're looking at all of these reforms, we're looking at the white paper, we're looking at the water industry, but fundamentally, how do we as a country make ourselves more resilient to our changing climate and to what's happening with water is got to be really key, and that's looking at addressing assets, that's looking at addressing asset health, that's looking at how we move water around, that's looking at leakage, that's all of these things. But it's also, as I say, looking at customer behaviour, but they all need to be taken into account, because I think you only truly value, like with many things we might say, Chair, we only truly value things when we don't have them.
Yeah. And to your point earlier about we now worry in your new role about dry summers. I worry, obviously as a rural constituency with lots of farmers, I worry about dry summers, and the moment it rains, I'm terrified of flooding. So it's this continual battle of
absolutely,
of being out of kilter with it. I want to talk more about abstractions, and I've met with many farmers in East Suffolk. As I said, I've met with around 100 at the weekend that have raised continually issues with licensing. So we have licenses that are being revoked, that are being taken away, abstraction licenses are being taken away, but there's no certainty with timings for that. And now we know that eventually lots of farms in my area won't be able to abstract water. They know that, they're getting their head around it, and they're being incredibly agile in the ways they're bringing forward solutions. And I want to raise a few examples with you, but I also want to talk about some of the challenges that we've seen in the system. So one man's flood is another man's opportunity, and when we have wet winters, I think of my constituency, but I know this is true across the country, what more we could be doing to collect that rainwater.
Yes.
I know that we've had my constituents, farmers have had many conversations over the years with the EA about that, and it's just gone into a spiralling, slow conversation that never allows them to take advantage of that rainwater. So what more can we do to look at those EA licences to abstract that rainwater, to hold it on reservoirs or potentially in other ways, in order to make sure that we can avoid the impact of flooding and it be a win-win for farming as well.
Yes, you're right. Completely and utterly right. And that is part of being more resilient, because if you can hold the rainwater when it falls, that makes you more resilient for the drier summers. So you're absolutely right. I know the EA have been sort of piloting some examples around the country, sort of looking at what more they can do to support farmers in helping with that resilience. There's some work ongoing, and I'm happy to sort of send details in or chat to you more about it later. And you're right on the abstraction, and that is simply the Environment Agency always needs to weigh up what's happening with the environment as well as the needs of farmers, and it is always really, really, really difficult. And I know particularly at the moment, root vegetable crops, they're finding it very, very hard because the ground is so hard to take that out without bruising them. So I'm very live to that current concern that farmers have had, and that, I do want to recognise, Chair, they've had a horrific year with the floods that they've had, followed by the drought. So I think this whole resilience picture, thinking about what I would call it, I sort of talk in the department, and David heard me bend his ear about this many times, the management of water. How are we managing water in an area. How are we effectively managing when we have too much, when we have too little? How are we managing water? And I think that's what we need to be thinking about.
Brilliant. Just quickly on abstractions a bit more. We have heard many concerns about the abstraction licences and they're being poorly monitored, poorly enforced. What are the timescales, if any, for reform of that system?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm happy to go away and sort of look at the evidence you've had of where, the examples of where they've been badly monitored and badly enforced, and sort of get back to you on those specifics, if that's okay.
Thank you. And before I hand over, Chair, can I just mention two incredible schemes in my constituency, which I'd be really keen to talk to you about further. One is the hydrocycle in Felixstowe, which you may be aware of, and it's a programme that I think has inspired many others and is a genuine opportunity. It was brought about by 6 farmers coming together, working really well with the EA and with other stakeholder organisations. It basically recycles groundwater to a certain extent, or rainwater, during the winter, stores it on the farms. And we're obviously a flood risk area, but also a coastal area. All that water, the vast majority of that water, if not all of that water, was being pumped into the North Sea. So it's a win-win for erosion, and it's a win-win in order to the pumping of it into the North Sea also facilitated or accelerated erosion. But we're also able to support farmers across a whole footprint. So I'd love to share that more with you. I'd also like to brief and get your opinions on it. I'd also like to mention the managed aquifer recharge trial, which is being talked about more in my constituency, and people are starting to trial it. It's essentially a subterranean reservoir. So taking water and rather than storing it on ground, above ground, storing it underground, essentially within the water table, and then pumping it back up. So the physical footprint of it is much smaller and also for planning perspective, it is much easier. But I'd be really delighted to share those two with you and perhaps even see if we can get you down to do a visit. But those are two initiatives that farmers are working incredibly closely with EA and other stakeholders, and are the best examples of innovation.
I love it. I think that sounds super exciting. I think that's a perfect example of where we want to. It's completely about building resilience, isn't it? And everyone becoming more resilient. So I'll have to don my wellies and come and visit.
Are you done, Julie? Thanks. Just before I bring in Helena, who's got a quick question. If we're going to move to a place where farmers in particular are going to be the people investing in on-site reservoirs and that sort of stuff, this is going to be chunky money for some of them. Is there going to be any help from the government in that?
I think I don't want to give you the picture of reservoirs that I'm imagining, sort of a huge reservoir on farms. More sort of the examples like Jenny's been given, where they're able to store water more effectively on their farm. So I don't want to give the wrong impression by saying.
We're not looking at leaks, but it's still.
So you're talking generally, how is there funding available to make the farms more resilient? I'd have to talk to my farming colleagues about sort of funding opportunities, if that's all right.
Okay, we'll come back to that then. Helena, you had a question before we move on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Climate.
Minister, I just wanted to ask briefly about the issue of landslips, which is an issue that is increasingly affecting more and more of our constituents, and we know that it's something that will increase with climate change as well. And when landslips are happening, it's having a really devastating impact for the residents affected and for their homes and properties. And they often feel like they are completely on their own. It feels like the issue of landslips is one that falls between gaps in policy legislation and guidelines, and it's really tough for those residents. I've had a number of residents in St Leonard's in my constituency, in Rye and in Fairlight as well, and I know other coastal colleagues have experienced the same, and we are going to be looking at it as a committee and taking evidence on it to look in depth at the issue. But one area that has been suggested to help alleviate the impact for residents is looking at the insurance scheme that people are able to access. So you will know, Minister, that flood re-insurance exists for residents who can't get home insurance because they live in an area that's at such high risk of floods. There has been a suggestion that the government could also look at providing a similar format of insurance for residents who find themselves in the unfortunate position of being impacted by a landslip. So I just put that suggestion to you, and it would be good to get your commitment to work on the issue of landslips going forward.
Okay. So there's no current plans to open the eligibility around flood re, but more than happy. I think because you're right, I think it is one of those issues that ends up falling between lots of different people's responsibilities. So I therefore think, I wonder if a better answer would be for myself and so the ministers from the relevant departments in which it falls down to sit and have a conversation sort of with you about it, because obviously insurance comes under Treasury, whereas so there's different people who are responsible for different things, and I think you're right to highlight it as one of those things that falls between. And I wonder if that might be, rather than me giving you a a sort of a passing answer now, that we actually have a look at it with the relevant people in the room who are responsible for the different bits.
Thank you.
All right.
We have the inquiry coming up, so consider that a marker duly planted. Right, we're going to move on to the question of climate adaptation. Sarah, you need to...
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Minister. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about how Defra intends to improve cross-government working on climate adaptation. To start, the Secretary of State said in a letter to this committee on the 3rd of March that the government was committed to strengthening the nation's resilience and was considering ways of embedding climate adaptation across government. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you are on those plans now, please?
Yeah, of course. And as I say, my huge focus is on resilience to the changing climate in terms of water. But one of the things I think that is most meaningful is the changes around the Green Book. Now, I know some people who work in local government's ears prick up whenever you mention the Green Book, but other people might not be quite as excited by it. But this is the rules and regulations in terms of what's going to be built where. Now, we've got in April 2025 that we've got to look at when anything that is now built in this country, that it is resilient to the effects and future effects of climate change. So if you're building a new hospital somewhere, you now have to consider overheating as well as obviously flooding. If you're building something, you have to take into account now. And this means that all of the wonderful things that we've been announcing in our 10-year infrastructure strategy, that climate resilience is now in here as a core thread running through it all. So if we're building new infrastructure, we have a hugely ambitious plan for what we want to do over the next 10 years, and you've got to have climate resilience in there, because there is no point, as we all agree, in building something that isn't going to be effective for the climate in which we're going to be facing in the future. Now, obviously, my particular focus is on water resilience and on flooding as well. But as I say, I sort of highlighted as well, overheating is another one of the things that we're sort of thinking about. So that is like a fundamental change that didn't exist previously and are looking now. And one of the other cross-government things, which I think is really exciting, is we've got, within each department, you've got a chief advisor, sort of researcher from in every sort of department. Now, we've got all of those people together to think about climate adaptation research and innovation framework, so that you've got all the different departments' research working together on sort of what are we going to do. So they're informing and advising decisions that are being made in government, because we want to, as this government, have a strong legacy going into the future in some of the things that we're creating and wanting to do, and fundamentally you've got to make that climate resilient.
Yeah. So, in practicality wise, how are you going to make that robust, that plan to work cross departmentally? I mean, obviously the ambition is there, but how is that going to work on the ground?
So in terms of the Green Book changes, they've happened. So whenever people are doing anything and they have to go via the Green Book, they have to make it climate resilient. So that's sort of done. And in terms of the research, that's done. That was set up in April this year. So that is active and working right now. And then we've recently written. So what we're also looking at is whether or not we should have. What are more of the climate assumptions? So when we say making it climate resilient, what are the assumptions we're making in terms of climate resilience? So to try and be more precise, like, are we making an assumption in climate resilience in that a 1.5 degree temperature rise? Are we making assumptions climate resilience is to be more resilient to a certain level of flooding? What are the assumptions we're making? What's the definition of climate resilience? So we've written to the Climate Change Committee to sort of speak to them about what should those, help shape what those assumptions should be, so that everybody knows when we're doing things across government, we're talking about climate resilience. This is the metric or the measure in which we're looking at to determine whether something is or isn't climate resilient.
Thank you. I just wanted to move on to the resilience of land, nature and food against climate change. In its recent progress report to Parliament on climate adaptation, the Committee on Climate Change was critical of some of the actions taken to support land, nature and food. So could you just tell me a little bit more about how will the farming roadmap, the profitability review and the land use framework tackle these issues identified by the CCC?
Okay, so the roadmap is, of course, being led by the farming minister, but we're going to respond formally to the Climate Change Committee's report. So we'll give a formal response to all of the points that they've made and the work that they're doing. So, but my role, as we've seen and felt it this year, we've just been talking about it with Sarah, we know that lack of resilience to climate change means that it's impacting our food because they've look at the harvest yields this year and what's happened. So I suppose my sort of focus has to be on the sort of broad objective in how do we make it more resilient. There's very specifics in how does that relate to the different farming schemes that we've got available. Obviously, that's the responsibility of the farming minister.
It just goes on to say the CCC said that the adaptation progress is either too slow or has stalled or is heading in the wrong direction. How would you explain that in terms of how your department is working to overcome that?
We will respond formally, but you take it on the chin and then you realise you've got to work harder and do more, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We take their report seriously. We'll respond formally to their responses, but since then, as I say, we've come out with a research plan, we've come out with the making sure we got it in the 10-year infrastructure, so I'm hoping that the Climate Change Committee will see that we've taken what they've said seriously and we're already making actions against it. But of course, am I satisfied with everything we've been doing? Not yet. Do I think we need to do more? Yes.
Thank you. It's always been mentioned a few times around farmers being able to develop their own infrastructure on farm in terms of their resilience to drought. But legislative reforms could require farmers to adopt basic adaptation measures or give them more freedom to be able to do that, to be able to create these reservoirs, which are going to be absolutely key, and indeed other sources of water on farm. Is the government looking at how better regulation can improve food security?
Yeah, so my role would be looking at how do we have the more resilient water system as a whole, and as I say, that involves making sure that farmers have the water they need at the time when they need it. So that's where I'm sort of seeing my role with this, and you're right to point out that at the moment it's not been working. So I know, as I say, there are trials that are happening right now, but of course there's other things that we want to try and do. So I've been talking to farmers about it to see what more, what are the kind of things they want, and they've talked quite a bit about making sure that they are able to, quite a lot of them have said, store their own water where they need it, and it's so great to hear the example that's happening there.
I think there's a lot of issues that farmers are facing at the moment, particularly with the halting of the SFI and obviously a lot of other issues that farmers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis that is really concerning for the industry. That's having an impact on how they farm. And I think particularly with the halt of the SFI, it's now they are looking at the challenges that are coming forward. Many of them are saying we want to be able to balance our work around nature, but we also have to intensify our farming practices because we have no choice but to do that because of the pressures in farming. But there's lots of actions that farmers can take around, for example, nature-based flooding initiatives and that soft infrastructure base to help issues on flooding. But there just isn't the incentive to be able to do that now. So as we're looking at that around their farming mechanisms, the way they farm, obviously that has an impact on food, but it also has an impact on livestock and their profitability going forward. You've already mentioned the issues that the farmers are having. I know certainly farmers in my patch, and indeed my brother is already feeding winter hay, and it's right across the patch that the impact on this is going to impact farmers going forward into future years, and ultimately it's going to impact their bottom line. So as we're developing our thoughts on this, how are we going to make sure that the government is improving resilience of that whole food supply chain, not only for livestock, but then going through that whole chain?
Yeah, so I mean, I can obviously speak to everything relating to water on your questions. So looking at, the horrendous time farmers had with floods. So we've got the NFU on the Floods Resilience Task Force. We've got the NFU looking at water pollution. And I really want farmers to feel like we are doing this with them, and that I know that there's willingness across the industry to try and look at how we how we deal with agricultural pollution, how we deal with resilience. In terms of the details on how the farming roadmap will work, I'm more than happy to talk to my colleague, the farming minister, and get her to answer those specifics of the questions in terms of the different schemes that you've mentioned. My role is to work with farmers around agricultural pollution and work with farmers around water resilience, but very happy to pick up any specifics with my colleague, the farming minister.
Just coming on to that, flood resilience in Somerset is obviously a really, really important factor. I've had farms certainly for the last few years that have spent 6 months underwater during the winter months, and then they're left in a terrible situation, having to pick up from that. But they understand that by allowing their farmland to flood, they are then, by sacrificing their land, they're then supporting thousands of homes downstream from flooding. But obviously there is an issue around compensation for them to do that. But recently, and very worryingly, and I have written to your office about this, the Environment Agency have written to riparian ratepayers telling them that they are going to stop the funding in terms of maintenance of the rivers due to a lack of funding, and that's going to happen in 6 months. Now, obviously, it's caused a considerable amount of alarm from land and property owners surrounding those impacted watercourses in Somerset. Also, I've been in touch with the Somerset Drainage Board Consortium, who have also written to the Environment Agency on this issue to formally challenge the action. I'd like to outline my concerns at this decision to stop the funding, because it will only heighten the risk for flooding across Somerset and in my constituency of Glastonbury and Somerton. It's absolutely crucial that we maintain the maintenance of the main rivers in Somerset to protect our homes and our businesses from continued flooding. And we don't have to go back too far into 2013, 2014 to really see when the impact was absolutely horrendous. So along with myself, the internal drainage boards have written to ask that the Environment Agency look at halting this action right now, but also look at fulfilling their statutory obligations and the consultation properly, because we don't believe that has been done. And also allow time for a joint working group to be developed to bring forward a sustainable path going forward. So I would ask you, Minister, if there is what approach that you will help to support to help us mitigate flooding going forward in Somerset.
Yeah, and thank you for writing to me about this issue, and I just want to recognise that I completely understand the fear people have, because once you've been flooded, I don't think you ever get over being flooded, so I understand why it's a worry in your constituency. I know that it's speaking more generally rather than about your specific case, that the EA are moving lots of maintenance into the high consequence assets, so the assets that would be horrifically devastating to huge numbers of people because they were left in such a poor state previously. So they are having to look at some of those high consequence assets for maintenance. But I think for your specific example, I wonder whether it might be more helpful to get the IDB together with the EA and yourself and maybe myself in a room to sort of look at what's happening here and are there any things that can be done. But as I say, on a wider point, I know that across the country, the EA are having, because they just have to prioritise those high consequence assets. But let's pick that up as what can be done in your area.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that, and the offer of a meeting is very welcome. But just on the other side, if you like, of drought and heat, wildfires, as we've seen right across the country, has been a massive issue this summer. Somerset does have a considerable amount of peatland in it, so although we didn't suffer with any wildfires this year, it's something that an issue that we need to take very seriously and design measures around how to mitigate those extremes of temperature, but also in terms of drought and flooding. Could you just tell me a little bit more about what measures you as a department are putting in place to develop actions on that? And I know that we have covered it to a degree here today.
On the specifics on peatland and peatland management, then I know my colleague Minister Craze is looking at that and has been doing some work on the particulars around peatland and peatland management. I suppose on the issues of sort of wildfires, that probably comes more into farming, if I'm being really honest with you. But I think sort of more particularly around sort of, I talked before to Jenny about the management of water in that area and my vision for how do we get to a system where we can effectively manage water in that area. Obviously part of managing water in that area is soil and the ability to hold and retain water in different areas. So I think that's where I'm sort of coming from it.
But it's also maintenance of the rivers, isn't
of course,
it? And that's where I was coming from. That obviously if we are reducing our funding to be able to support the maintenance of those rivers, then that has a knock-on impact.
Understood. Down
the line.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'd misunderstood. Okay, yes, no, you're quite right. We need to be able to manage all of our water courses effectively, and as I say, happy to pick up on the specifics that you've mentioned in your area, because I know how awful it is for the people that suffered with the floods last time.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, final section, Global Plastics Treaty, at the risk of ending on a downbeat. Josh, you're going to lead us on this.
Thank you. Good to have you in, Minister. A lot of us had really high hopes for last month's talks in Geneva, but as we know, sadly, they collapsed once again, and nations couldn't even seem to agree on what the voting procedure should be. So what's your view on the main reasons behind that? What were those main bones of contention?
Gosh, yeah. And thanks, Josh. I mean, I went, I went, just on a personal level, went to Geneva with high hopes myself, and I have to say, our team, they were incredible, the people from Defra going out to represent the United Kingdom, and I just want to pay tribute to them. And to say that we were all disappointed is probably an understatement. I think we were incredibly disappointed not to have secured that. And some of our officials have been working on this plastics treaty for years, and they were, visibly upset by the end of it. So I pay 100%, tribute to them and everything they've done on that. In terms of why, there's a range of different reasons. There was a range of clauses, articles within the treaty that we just couldn't seek agreement on. As you know, the UK is part of the High Ambition Coalition, so I had various meetings with various people from different countries, of course, but we met as the High Ambition Coalition. We've got High Ambition Coalition and friends now, so I was like, what's the definition of a friend of the High Ambition Coalition? But it's everybody who signed the Nice wake-up call, so this is a huge number of countries, and I think it's very difficult to pinpoint on exactly why it didn't work, but fundamentally it didn't work because we couldn't get all the countries to agree. So it's like, what happens now, and how do we move forward? And it was good. We had the Ellen MacArthur Foundation out there, and they brought with them lots of big business. So there was support from business there. So I don't know. I was gutted because we went from sort of thinking that we could agree this multilateral treaty, and but I'm an optimist. We don't give up. We go again. We try again. We keep having those conversations. We keep talking to some of the other countries. We keep looking for ways in which we can negotiate and find common ground, and that's, I think, the answer. You just keep going, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good attitude to have in the face of what, as you said, was really disappointing and quite soul-destroying, actually, as you said, particularly for the people who've worked on it for so long.
Yes.
We held an evidence session on the treaty back in July, and one of the things we were particularly concerned about was industry lobbying. There were even reports of independent scientists taking part in the negotiations being threatened. How big of an impact do you think that industry lobbying had on those negotiations, and what steps do you think we can take to address that for when we come back to this next time?
Yeah, I saw that evidence session, and it was incredibly worrying that scientists would feel that they were being pressured in any way. I met with when I was over in Geneva, I met with Richard, and just to sort of show the support the United Kingdom has for our independent scientific community, who is giving its evidence in good faith, and that we 100% stand behind them and support them. I mean, as the United Kingdom, we didn't meet with lobbies. My role was to talk to ministers from different countries to see where we could find common ground, and that was sort of my focus out there in Geneva, was to try and find a way in which we could all come together. And of course, with any treaty and any compromise anywhere, you're looking all the time for what's the landing zone that everybody could accept. So that's my focus. But just to sort of put on the record, the UK stands behind its scientific community.
Thank you. That's really good to hear that. As you all know, it's been highlighted that by the year 2060, global plastic waste could reach 1.7 billion tonnes, which could cost $281 trillion to clean up, which is more than $32,000 per person on the planet. I think clearly global action is needed on this, but like you, I'm an optimist and a pragmatist. And given that it seems a global treaty is out of reach for now, do you think now's the time to consider alternatives like maybe a voluntary agreement with a coalition of the willing, perhaps through that high ambition coalition? Yeah,
that's a really interesting point. I mean, there's things we can do as a country. And of course, we've got Minister Cray's leading on on recycling and circular economy, and so there are definitely things we can do as a country. I think there are also definitely conversations that can be had with some of the big companies through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation about actions they can take as well. So we can start from home, and which is exactly what the government's doing with the Circular Economy Task Force, and looking at what we can do as a country. And of course, global action is what's needed. We need global action in this area. That is really the only way we can fundamentally tackle it. So I'm not giving up on global action. I'm not saying that we should forget about this. I think we keep going, and we keep trying to build coalitions and arguments with other countries. We keep using diplomatic levers to have those conversations with different people about what's the landing zone that we can all accept. And I think, because yes, you could take action with a smaller number of countries, and obviously we're considering everything, but fundamentally, if we want to deal with plastic pollution, then we need to look at global action. But we're doing a lot as a country, and I think that's to be celebrated as well, because if you're going to go out there and argue for something, you've got to be able to stand up and say, and this is what we're doing ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's room for a sort of maybe a two-tier approach like we've had with some of the international treaties, where everybody kind of stands up to a common framework, but some countries perhaps phase in measures quicker than others? Is that a way of maybe breaking the deadlock, making some progress, and then trying to encourage the laggards, for want of a better word, to come along later?
It's not something I've looked at yet, but I think I'm quite open for exploring sort of in a general basis all different options we have, because again, as I said, how do I like to work as a politician is looking where we can all join together and achieve the same aim. And so I'm keen for whatever we can do to reduce plastic pollution. That's not something we've been considering at the moment, because our ambition is still that we achieve a global plastics treaty. But there'd be no harm in me sort of looking at other things, but I just want to be honest with the committee. My focus is on the global plastics treaty.
Just lastly, the one thing I wanted to ask you about is the scandal of plastic waste exports. It seems to me that from successive governments there have been really warm words but a lack of tangible action. So this committee looked at this back in 2022 and the recommendation then was a ban on exports by 2027. Back in 2019, both the Labour and Conservative manifestos pledged to bring in a ban of some form, and the previous government committed to a ban on exports to non-OECD countries, which only make up around 20% of exports, but it would have been a start. Despite repeated commitments to consult on that, they never did during their term in office. Obviously, our government has committed to a circular economy, but there doesn't seem to have been anything specifically said on plastic waste exports, either in our manifesto or in subsequent statements from ministers. I'm sure you'd agree that we need to tackle mismanagement of plastic waste and also boost our own domestic recycling sector as well. So what's your position on that issue of exports?
Let me take that and give that to Minister Craig, because she's obviously responsible for all of the Circular Economy Task Force, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent her and sort of ask her a little bit about the plastic waste exports and if that's something she's considering with the circular economy, and then I can give you make sure the committee has a proper answer from the right person.
Thank you for that. Would be appreciated. Jane, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just very quickly to say that I had some correspondence from one of the witnesses at our last evidence session who went with Greenpeace to the conference, who was very complimentary about the UK delegation's tireless efforts throughout the negotiations. So just wanted to kind of pass that on. He mentioned that the major divergence between the ambitious countries was about finance, and that was obviously something that he thought the UK delegation could maybe work with on other northern countries before the next opportunity to talk about these things again. But I did want to pass on that kind of positive message.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, I do think the UK delegation was really excellent, and there were a number of different things where they were strong. Plastic production was another one, chemicals of concern was another one. There was a whole range, and you're quite right to point out that ahead of any other formal negotiation, we need to be talking to other countries about, where compromises could be made and what sort of landing zone would be appropriate, and if we're going to seek what we really want to achieve here, which is that global plastics treaty, and I'm still completely committed to trying to achieve something. So we keep going.
Yeah. Just finally on that, actually, I find myself in a WhatsApp group of international parliamentarians curated by Philippe Bollot from the Assemblée Nationale. And again, across the whole range of countries that are represented in that group, a lot of praise for the UK representation in that. I'm sure that if giving up were an option, we could consider it, but it isn't, so don't. And I think that's one point in which we can end as a point of genuine consensus, that the committee and the government are completely aligned on this. So, Minister, thank you very much indeed for your attendance. David, thank you likewise. We are, I'm afraid, out of time again. But we appreciate your attendance, we appreciate your cooperation. We'll follow up various points in correspondence. But for today, I close this meeting. Order.